Got it. Great. Well, thank you very much. It is such a pleasure to be back. I was talking to Wayne earlier. I think it's been since May that I've been with you guys, and it's always such a pleasure and honor to speak with this wonderful group and to have people from literally all over North America. What an honor and a privilege. And I hope today will be helpful. If you've heard me speak before, you know that I like to validate people. I think validation is super powerful. Just when we name what we're experiencing, sometimes it just alleviates some of the pressure, some of the stress. And we've all been experiencing change. It's been a wild season these last few years. We've been bombarded with more change than our ancestors possibly experienced in their entire lifetime. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling change fatigue, it would be completely understandable. And hopefully I'll provide some information today that will be helpful of how to navigate change in the healthiest way that we possibly can. And I'm going to go back and forth and sharing screens, and hopefully technology works for us. But as Wayne said, I'm Anne-Marie. I'm a psychotherapist. I love to help people understand their mental health so we can get the best out of our mental health. And at the end, there'll be a time for questions. And please be free to ask anything that might be helpful for you. So I'm going to share my screen. And hopefully you can see my slideshow. So we're going to be talking about navigating change, and you're going to notice throughout I've got a nautical theme happening here. So we've got boats and ships and ocean liners, because when we talk about change, there's some analogies that are going to make a lot of sense when we talk about storms. So welcome. Thank you for coming on a Wednesday evening. Just honor that you're here. And we're going to be talking about what happens when we experience change. What are the stages of change? You might have heard of these, but hopefully there'll be some useful knowledge in there. And how to navigate change resiliently. And then we're going to have that little bit of time to chat at the end. So something I want you to remember throughout this presentation is that even good change can be stressful. So even good change can be stressful. I'm going to explain some of the neurobiology about why that is. This is a fact. And why even good change, like getting married, having a baby, getting a new job, even that can create stress on our hearts, on our minds, on our bodies. And I think it's pretty obvious to say we've had a lot of change that hasn't been so positive. You know, some things have been happening outside of our control. I don't know all of your unique stories. Maybe you've had devastating change happen in your life. So if good change can be hard, gosh, difficult change can just be even that much more challenging to navigate. So keep that in mind. Even good change can be stressful. And I want to start with the tale of a storm. So we hear stories of people out on the water and lifeboatmen surviving terrible storms. So I want to imagine that we're out on the water. You're out there as an individual and you're in a boat. And there are three different mindsets that we could have if we were in that boat, in that storm. The first two. One of them is a victim. And that person says, oh my gosh, I'm in this storm. It's completely beyond my control. I'm going to drown. And when it comes to change, some of us have a victim mentality. Now, when I say that, it's without judgment. When people have a victim mentality, it's because they've been through a lot of storms. Sometimes it's because of trauma. Sometimes it's because they've literally had too much outside of their control. They've not been able to control it. So if you see yourself there or someone you know there, let's have compassion for that. Let's just acknowledge some of us have a victim mentality that when we're in a storm of change, we feel like we're going to drown. Actually, I think a lot of us have been there in the last few years because we've been bombarded with storm after storm and hurricane after hurricane. You know, on the flip side of that, maybe we'd think optimistically, and maybe we're a survivor and we say, I'm going to survive this. You know, I can handle this storm and nothing's going to stop me. You know, on the surface, that sounds great. You know, in comparison to a victim, maybe you're being more optimistic and you have a powerful mindset. Unfortunately, sometimes survivors fall into what we call toxic positivity, and they do survive the storm, but at a great cost. They deplete their resources, they impact their mental health because they didn't take care of themselves during the storm. All they did was survive. But if that's the best we know how, that's what we do. And I've seen a lot of people that have survived the last few years. They've just made it through. They pushed and they pushed and they pushed. And now they're exhausted. They're just done. So sometimes there's a victim in the storm. Sometimes there's a survivor. But there's a third mindset. And this is the one where I want to help people get to, because this is where we can really thrive. The navigator. So a navigator says, okay, I can't control the storm, but I can control my boat. The navigator has awareness of what's happening. They don't ignore it. They don't suppress it. They don't just try to be positive. There's a legitimate storm happening, but they navigate it with skills and insight to help them get through to the other side. So we're going to talk about how to navigate change and how to move from either a victim or a survivor mentality into that of a navigator so that we can survive change well. So what happens when we experience change? Now, I want to make it very clear, I am a social worker therapist. I am not a neurobiologist or a neuroscientist, but I'm going to try and explain to you some of the brain chemistry to validate what's happening when we go through tremendous change. We all cope with it differently. And again, there's no judgment. If you fall in any of those categories, it's because of life. It's because of things that have happened. For myself, I know there's been times when I've fallen into all three of those categories. So we all cope with change differently, and change can be challenging for all of us. And the reason why is because when we go through change, our brain actually has to do heavy lifting. It has to adapt, it has to learn, it has to strategize, and that takes a ton of energy. In your brain, we have different parts of our brain that do different functions. And again, I'm not the expert on this, but I do know something that hopefully is helpful. So our basal ganglia, which you can see, it's lit up in the first picture there. That's a part of our brain that's associated with the familiar, habit, routine. You know, your drive to work, let's say, or your drive to school, whatever it might be. We know, I don't know about you, but I can definitely be the type of person who zones out a little bit when I drive. We do that when something's familiar. We can zone out. It actually takes less work for our brain. That's the basal ganglia at work. When things are familiar, they take less energy. Our prefrontal cortex, which is basically the front of our brain, that's where we do our thinking, logic, reasoning, problem solving. When we have to learn something new, our prefrontal cortex is involved. It's adapting, it's learning, it's processing all that new information. Right now, all of your prefrontal cortexes are probably being lit up. If I were to put you under a proper, MRI scanner or something, it would light up and show activity because possibly I'm sharing something new. When we use our prefrontal cortex, we are using more energy. When we are learning something new, we use energy. Then we have our hippocampus right down in the middle of our brain. This is where short-term memories are converted to long-term memories. And when people struggle with memory, often it's because something around the hippocampus has been impacted. So the hippocampus, when it takes in new information, short-term memories, it looks at it and it compares it and says, do we know this? Is this familiar? Is this something I need to convert and store in the long term? So again, it's involved in the process of learning new information, and it's using up energy in our brain. And then finally, we have our hypothalamus. And this is a control center of our brain that's involved with a lot of our survival processes, including the body's fight or flight response. So we get new information from our prefrontal cortex. It goes to our hippocampus and it's starting to compare. Do we know this? Is this new? I don't think this is familiar. The basal ganglia says this is not familiar. Prefrontal cortex is telling me this is new. And then the hypothalamus chimes in and says, I don't like this. I don't like this new information. I don't want anything to do with this. This is overwhelming. And then the fight or flight response kicks into gear. So our hypothalamus is what's responsible for our body's stress response. So when change is happening, all of these different processes in our brain are falling into play. Like, this is a neurobiological process. This is real. There's research behind this. When people struggle with change, it's not just the mindset. That can be part of it. But literally, it is taking energy to adapt to this new information. And our brain is working in overtime saying, do I like this information? I don't know if I like it. Is it familiar? Is it a short-term memory? Is it a long-term memory? Should I even bother storing this? Is it going to change again if I watch the news tomorrow? You can just imagine everything that's going on When we think of the last 2.5 years, whatever it's been, the amount of information we've been bombarded with, and this is only one area of our lives. Who knows with each individual on this call what you've had happen personally and in your family and at your job. So much change. If you're tired, it's for good reason. Your brain has been working nonstop. And I don't believe we were personally designed that way. Life was always hard for different reasons, but in some ways it used to be simpler. We didn't have access to the same amount of information. We see more bad news in one day than some of our ancestors did in an entire lifetime. And our hypothalamus is saying, I don't like this. And it's causing stress, it's causing anxiety, it's causing depression, causing burnout. Change fatigue happens when that brain doesn't get a chance to have a break. So I don't want to be the bearer of bad news in saying this, but I do want to validate when people struggle with change, when they're tired of change, there's a biological reason for it. Our brains get tired. They are a muscle that has been overused for quite some time. And that's, again, your unique story. You might have even infinitely more change than what I've even just talked about. But I keep talking about the pandemic just because it's a shared experience. We've been through it in different ways. Some people lost their jobs, some people had to work overtime and keep their job. So no two experiences are exactly the same. However, the pandemic in many ways is still a similar and shared experience. So I use that as my main example, but I definitely want to acknowledge that each of us have our own journey. And I've been through a lot of change in different ways. Getting a health diagnosis can be a change. Losing a loved one can be a tragic change. Moving can be a change. Change that happens in our control, change that happens that's outside of our control. So no matter the change, describing that neurobiological process, whether it's good or bad, it all takes energy. Somebody who graduates school and then gets engaged and then gets married and buys a house and has a baby, that might be like the story time Cinderella story, perfect life. It's still a lot of change, even though it's all beautiful, and it's still very taxing energy wise. And that's where you can get change fatigue. Our brain gets tired from learning. And there's a lot of other physiological processes in our body that can be involved. When that hypothalamus says, I don't like this change, our adrenal glands produce more adrenaline and other hormones to activate us. And our liver works harder, creating more glucose so that we can convert it into quick energy. And our digestive system says, Anne-Marie doesn't really need to digest her sandwich right now. She actually needs adrenaline and blood pumping to her extremities so she could fight this change if she needed to. So our whole body gets involved when we don't like change. And that's why people's bodies are aching and we're tired and maybe we're not having bowel movements as normal as we used to. If that's you, it's because of the change process and the stress associated with change. It can literally cause a chain reaction in our body. So this is important stuff to talk about. Mental health affects physical health, affects emotional health. So all of this is important to validate and to recognize. And there's good news coming because there's some tangible things we can do to help take care of our brain when it's tired, to help take care of our body when it's feeling the stress, to help manage and navigate change and selectively choose what change to focus on. Now I'm saying the word change a lot. Hopefully I'm saying it properly. Because sometimes when I repeat the same word, it's like a tongue twister. I want to talk about a different area of change before I go into skills. So I've been talking about sort of change happening from all different angles, good change and bad change. And at the end, I'm going to talk about skills to navigate it in a healthy way. Right now, I want to talk about the stages of change, which are a little bit different because this is mostly about changes we want to control. So for example, if I want to work out more, or if I want to go back to school, or if I want to move to a new city, I might be entering the stages of change. If there's a loved one that I want to see get some help, or to see positive change in their life, it can be really helpful to know about the stages of change because then we can help them in a way that is more purposeful, more intentional, and possibly more beneficial. So when it comes to any change in our life, we all land in one of the 5 stages of change. They're on the screen here: pre-contemplative, contemplative, preparation, action, and maintenance. When it comes to change, we all end up somewhere with any given change in our life. And I'm going to give you an example, so hopefully this will make sense. I think an example is the best way to explain it. So let's say the change you want to control in your life is you want to exercise more often. I don't know about anyone on the call, but I definitely want to exercise more often. And let's say there was a time when I wasn't thinking about exercising. It just wasn't on my radar. I was too busy, or maybe I didn't think it was important, or maybe I thought I exercised enough. That would be the pre-contemplative stage. I'm not yet thinking about it. I'm pre-contemplating it. So pre-contemplative means the change is not even on my radar. And maybe you have someone in your life who you think, gosh, they really could benefit from some meaningful change. Maybe they have an addictions issue, or maybe they're in a problematic relationship. Maybe they're not doing so well at their job. And gosh, if they just changed this, they'd be doing better. But if that person is pre-contemplative, they're not even ready to have a conversation with you about the change because they're not even thinking about the change yet. This is where knowing the stages of change can be helpful. Because if we know where someone is, we can know how to help them. If we know where we are, we can know what we need to help ourselves. So back to exercise. When I'm not thinking about it, when it's not on my radar, I'm in pre-contemplation. Contemplation is the stage when I'm starting to think about making a change. So I'm starting to, follow people on Instagram who exercise really well and, kind of get inspired a little bit. Or maybe I'm just starting to, think about my life and just thinking, oh gosh, I'm really tired. I'd love more energy. Maybe I should exercise a little bit more. I'm contemplating the change. Maybe you have people in your life that are contemplating change, or maybe you're contemplating some change in your life. Maybe you're thinking about how maybe you want some better boundaries with loved ones, or maybe you want to do more self-care. Maybe you want to take your lunches at work. That's a contemplative stage of change. Preparation is when we've moved past thinking about the change and we're starting to take steps. We're researching, back to the exercise example. Maybe I'm starting to look up gyms that I can get a cheap membership, or looking up free apps on my phone that can help me exercise, or looking up videos on YouTube. I'm making steps toward the change. I'm not changing it. I'm just preparing for the change. I'm starting to make a bit of a plan. This is such a key stage. It's actually, I argue, is actually the most important stage. The people who came up with the stages of change would actually put an article. This is really interesting. I'll just in the paper every year in January, when New Year's resolutions happen, they would actually put an article and say, don't quit smoking as your New Year's resolution. They would actually tell people not to. And the reason why is because when we have a New Year's resolution, we often don't go in the preparation stage. We jump right into action. And without preparation, we tend to fail. So people would jump right into action. They'd try to quit smoking and they'd fail because they hadn't spent enough time in the preparation of it. They hadn't spent enough time thinking about, okay, how can I successfully quit smoking? How am I going to replace that with something else so that I don't go through withdrawal? What am I going to do when I go to social events and everybody's smoking and I'm not? What am I going to do to replace that oral fixation that I'm used to having something in my mouth and now I don't have something in my mouth? How am I going to deal with the nicotine that used to stimulate me and now I don't have a stimulant? We actually need to think all those things through, prepare for change to be successful. So they'd say, don't do it. Don't do New Year's resolutions unless you've prepared, unless you've done your research. So I find that very interesting because I see people get well. I see people, get better from addiction or from other harmful life situations because they learn how to prepare. They learn how to do the research, and then we build in the resources they need so they can do the change successfully. I'm hoping this is making sense. It's all going to tie in together. So preparation stage, you're doing the research, you're making a plan. Action phase is when you start the change. So there are 3 phases before you actually make a change, when it's a change you can control. And then eventually you get ready, you do your research, you can start exercising, you can go back to school. That would mean attending the classes. It would mean going to the gym. It would mean using my apps and actually starting to exercise. I am now in the action phase. And then maintenance is the last stage of change. You're maintaining the change that you've just developed. And it takes work. Just because I went to the gym once doesn't mean I'm going to keep going. Maintenance takes work, it takes commitment, it takes resources. An important thing to acknowledge with these 5 stages of change is that relapse can happen at any point. I could get from contemplation about exercise to preparing and decide, oh, this is a lot of work. I don't think I can do it. I'm too busy right now. And I go back to just thinking about it or not even thinking about it. That's what we call a relapse. And that's okay. It's normal. If I allow myself to relapse, one day I might start thinking about it again, and maybe I'll be more ready. When it comes to people with addictions, we'll tell them relapse is part of recovery. We say it to validate it, to make it normal, so that when they do, pick up that drink again or smoke that cigarette again, they don't shame themselves, because shame is unmotivating and people fall off the bandwagon. But if they have compassion and say, oh, this was just a bad day, tomorrow's a new day, they're more likely to stay in that action phase of change. So relapse can happen at any point. So if you're someone who's thinking about change in your life and you want to make good changes you can control, I want you to keep these stages of change in mind, because you might find them helpful. So for example, if you've been trying to go to the gym or trying to eat better and you're really struggling, maybe go back to the preparation stage. Maybe go back and do more research, get some help, talk to someone so that you can strengthen your resolve to be able to do the change. If it's that you want to take better care of your mental health, again, maybe it's something where look at the preparation stage or think about it more before jumping right into action so that you can get the appropriate help. Relapse can happen at any point, but we can always jump back into the stages of change. So now that we've talked about change that you could control, and with the world the way it is, with so much outside of our control, sometimes it's nice to talk about what we control. I'm going to talk about some skills to navigate change. And you could keep the stages of change in your mind with some of these, because it will be relevant. And I also have a handout. I think Wayne put it in the comments and he's going to send them out later, but I actually have a handout on the stages of change, and it talks about how to help someone from one stage to the next. So maybe I'll just stop the share for a second. If someone is not even thinking about change, you don't help them by saying, you really should just go get a job. That would be an action phase suggestion for someone who's not even thinking about change, and it just creates conflict. And for yourself, if you're thinking, again, I keep going to exercise because it's just such a simple example. By all means, I'm not saying you guys need to exercise more. I need to exercise more, but we'll just use that as the example. If it's exercise and I tell myself, oh, I really should exercise more, and I just force myself before I'm ready, I'm actually going to harm myself potentially. I'm going to shame myself, unmotivate myself. Whereas if I start talking to myself like, oh, I have a choice. Like, I can do this. I could not do this. It's all right. There's no pressure here. That's more helpful. That actually motivates me to move from just thinking about it to maybe I'll just do some, harmless research. I don't have to go to the gym. I just want to kind of look at options. And so the handout explains how you can communicate to someone to help them move through the stages of change. And you can also use it for yourself if there's something you want to change. So some skills to navigate change. We want to be that navigator, and we want to navigate change well. Validate the change. I started this call saying I love to validate people, and there's a reason why. When we validate ourselves, we actually get ourselves out of the hypothalamus response of fight or flight, our body's alarm mode. When we validate, we get ourselves out of that back into our thinking brain, back into our resting, logical thinking, problem-solving brain. When we're there, we can think more clearly, make healthier decisions. It does take energy, but it actually is more restful overall than the fight or flight response. Validate the change to help yourself get through the change. Change is work. Remember that. Something like saying to yourself, I'm allowed to be tired and anxious. I'm going through a lot of change. Oh, that's so much better than, gosh, I need to be better at this. What's wrong with me? I'm so lazy. That's going to put my brain in the stress response. Shaming myself, self-criticism literally lights up the part of my brain associated with danger. because your brain is saying, why is Anne-Marie mad at herself? There must be something wrong. We need to kick into gear. Self-compassion, validating, diffuses some of the stress. It allows our body to be more at rest. It helps us think more clearly. And all we did was validate. So literally just validating yourself can help you navigate the change. It's also important to surround yourself with people who will validate you. And I don't know about you, but I think a lot of us maybe have friends who love to give advice. You know, I'm a geriatric millennial, and I'm from a generation where we were told, you know, just be positive, just be optimistic, change your mindset, you know, prove yourself, go to school, get a career. Like, we were just downloaded all this pressure, and it was well-intentioned. It was from our parents who wanted us to do well in life. But what it did was it put us in a stress response, like constantly. We live in this sense of urgency of achievement. But when we validate ourselves, like, it's okay to be anxious, it's okay to be stressed, I'm allowed to have off days. Relapse is part of recovery. You name the validation. When we do that, we actually slow down our adrenal glands. Even just thinking about it, it makes me breathe deeper. It literally shifts the physiology of stress back into rest when all we do is validate. Validate the change, validate yourselves, and surround yourself with people who validate you. If you've got friends who are advice givers, bless them, say thank you very much, but validate yourself. And hopefully you can surround yourself with people who will validate you. And I almost want to ask if anyone has questions. Write them down if you do, or write them in the comments and we'll get to them at the end, because I really want to make sure this is making sense. I could probably do an entire session just on validating and the power of that, but we'll move on for now. Another skill is practice acceptance. When we fight inevitable change, so fighting the storm is there. We can't do much about it. We keep our body and our brain in an activated stress response. And that's so hard, right? We want to fight. We don't want this change to happen sometimes, but fighting it gets us caught up in the current. You know, I say this with people who have panic attacks. You know, we don't want to have anxiety. We don't want panic. It's very uncomfortable for anyone who's ever had it. I hope I'm not even triggering people right now. I just want to acknowledge that. When a panic attack comes, the best thing we can actually do is ride it like a wave. Again, the nautical theme today, oceans, water, boats. When anxiety comes or worry comes, if we fight it, we actually create more worry. We create more panic, because the fight is the fight or flight response. It's highlighting the survival center alarm mode of our brain, and it's saying something's wrong. We need to fight this. It's adding fuel to the fire. Whereas if we ride it like a wave, the wave is crashing over me. I don't like it. I don't like it. This is really stressful. I'm overwhelmed. Just breathe through it, let it come, and then it dissipates. When we fight the wave, we get caught up in the current. When we ride the wave, it's smoother sailing. That happens with panic, that happens with worry, and it happens with all the emotions associated with change. We want to ride the wave. Yes, it's easier said than done, 100%. If anyone's ever had a panic attack or anyone ever struggled with anxiety, it is very scary. It's very overwhelming because your body is literally on system overload. Riding the wave helps it dissipate. So what does that look like practically? When we want to practice acceptance of something that we're struggling with, it might look like saying something like, it's okay, I don't have to like this change, and I'm going to practice accepting and moving toward my new reality one day at a time. You notice I didn't put a but in there. I don't like this change, but I'll accept it. When we say but, we've just discounted what we've just said. So I say and. It's okay, I don't like this change. Like, that's legitimately okay. You don't have to like it. There's going to be a lot of change in our lives that we don't like. I don't have to like this. You could add in there, it's okay to be anxious, and I'm going to practice accepting this new reality. And it will take practice. We actually, in a type of therapy called dialectical behavior therapy, there's a concept called radical acceptance, because sometimes it's radical to accept things that are happening to us. We don't want to accept it. It's turbulent, it's triggering, it's hard, it's sad, sometimes it's grief. And yet somehow in the radical acceptance of that, there is peace and there is freedom. The Serenity Prayer is actually a picture of this. If you're familiar with this, they use it a lot in Alcoholics Anonymous. And this is just a little piece of it. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Now, I don't know if they knew this at the time, but that prayer, that actually captures the navigator mindset. It's saying, I'm in a storm. I can't control the storm, but I am going to try and control my boat. And God, help me know the difference. Help me know what's the storm and what's my boat. What can I control and what can I not control? And help me accept the stuff in between. Because in that acceptance, we're actually more likely to find that peace. We're going to actually take care of our brain in that acceptance. Does that mean suppress our emotions? No. And let me make that super clear. That's never going to be a message I send. Emotions need to be emoted. That's why we call them emotions. They need to be in motion. And so we have to give our emotions motion and movement. We have to express them. And at the same time, practicing that acceptance. So it's both and, not either or. They're not mutually exclusive. They can coexist. I can hate the change and practice accepting it at the same time. That's a very abstract thought, but it is possible. And it's something we build. It's something that we practice, and it's flexibility in our brain. It practices acceptance and resilience. Because if I can feel my feelings, my anxiety, my sadness, my anger, and still work on my mindset, gosh, there's wisdom there. I'm allowing my logical brain and my emotional heart to both have a voice. When we live in emotions, that can be problematic. When we just live in logic, that is equally problematic. We want a little bit of both, and that's where we find wisdom. And another way that we can navigate change well, another skill, is ride the wave of anxiety. I talked about in the acceptance because they're very paralleled. Acceptance is about the mindset as much as it is about the emotions. Riding the wave of anxiety can really help you get through a lot of change. And I shared another handout it's called Distress Tolerance Skills. That's the dialectical behavior therapy I was talking about. Riding the wave of anxiety is one, but there are many distress tolerance skills. They're ways to tolerate the stress, the de-stress that we feel when things happen outside of our control. People who struggle with any type of mental health issue could benefit from learning distress tolerance skills. So we tolerate the distress so that it doesn't have to rule and guide our life. We use these to practice allowing ourselves to feel anxiety and other emotions in a safe way, so that when the waves come and they crash over us, it then moves on. And there's something we have called our window. So I'm just moving the little people around so I can see my screen. We all have something called a window of tolerance. So you can kind of see me on the window of your screen. We all have a window of tolerance when we deal with difficult emotions. And so, for example, whether it's anxiety or depression, we all have our own window. Some people have a smaller window. Often that's because of trauma. It can also happen because of having limited resources. So people who, for example, don't have a good social network, or maybe they don't have a very supportive family, they might have a low window of tolerance. If you're under a lot of stress and you're feeling burnt out, your window of tolerance shrinks. And what that means is we're more easily in a distressed state. Things distress us more easily. If you've ever been in a time in your life when little things really agitate and aggravate you, your tolerance window is smaller than maybe what it used to be. And that happens with life. When we have a lot on our plate, I think with the pandemic, all of our windows have shrunk. Things get to us more. People would say to me, Amory, what's wrong with me? I'm cynical and I'm just not who I used to be. Like, why have I just become this awful person? And I say, oh, no, you're burnt out. You know, you're not an awful person. You are absolutely burnt out. That's why you feel cynical all of a sudden. And it's the window of tolerance has gone squish. And so when we learn the stress tolerance skills, we learn ways to open that window back up. So when things come, when triggers happen, When we get bombarded with more change after change after change, we're able to tolerate more of it because we've used these skills to make that window broader. So we're less agitated, our brain is less activated, and we can handle and ride the wave. So riding the wave is one distress tolerance skill. On the handout, there are a few more. There's one that's called accepts, which is a good word for accepting change. But I won't go through that all now because you can look at that later. Another, just one of my favorite ones, it's a self-soothing technique, but it's also a way to tolerate distress. I've shared it with this group before, but there's new people on the call. It's a self-hug. So all you do is you take your right hand and you put it under your left armpit, take your left hand, put it on your right bicep. So if you can see me, so my right hand is by my heart, my other hand is on my bicep, and you just squeeze and hold. And I can't do this without taking a deep breath because I'm actually activating my body's peace response, the vagus nerve, when I do this. I'm also releasing oxytocin, which is the hormone that's released when a mother has a baby and she looks in her baby's eyes. Oxytocin is released. It helps with love and bonding. We can actually release it for ourselves with a hug. It's self-soothing because I am physically touching my body. We know that babies are soothed when they're touched and they're caressed, and we don't grow out of that. Now, because of trauma, some people might not like to be touched as much, but whatever you can do to soothe yourself, that can help you tolerate distress. This is a grounding technique, if you've ever heard of grounding techniques, because you are using your physical sense of touch. When we use our senses, we ground ourselves. So this one little skill, the self-hug, just one thing where you squeeze yourself, is doing about 5 things at once that are good for your mental health. And that can help you tolerate distress. Some people also rock. Oh, just feeling overwhelmed. It was a hard day today and I just got a lot of bad news and it's just really hard. And so just hold yourself like this, rock if you need to. If you want, you could pray while you do this. You could listen to music, and it can help you ride that wave, tolerate that distress. And it can help increase that window. I can be a bit of a fire hose of information. Hopefully that's not too much. Thankfully, this is being recorded if anyone needs to listen to it later. And if you've got questions at the end, I will leave some time. We're almost done the slides here, just a few more. Find anchors. This is another way to navigate change. So when change is happening, it's that storm again. We need something that provides us stability. An anchor keeps the boat stable in the storm. Anchors are things that are safe, reliable, and familiar. Anchors can be found in routine. So for example, maybe everything in my life is changing, but I can at least walk my dog every morning at 8 a.m. That's an anchor to me. I don't have a dog. I'm just giving you an example. Maybe your anchor is having a coffee with a friend at the local coffee shop every Sunday after church. That could be an anchor for you. Maybe it's through community, getting together with people you volunteer with, people you work with, people in a small group or in a club or in some type of sport or extracurricular activity. Something that's familiar, because remember, familiar takes less energy. The basal ganglia, it's like, oh, I like this. I know this. I can zone out. Something familiar, something reliable, because reliable is consistent. We like consistent. That feels safe as long as it's a good reliable. That feels safe to our brain. And something safe, reliable, and I said familiar, reliable, and safe. We want safety. So finding those anchors can help us in a storm. They can help us through change. So remember, the survivor just copes. The navigator finds what they can control. They can't control the storm. They can control the boat. The anchors are things we can control. Hopefully you have an anchor in your life. For me, what are my anchors? Gosh, I try, whenever it's a nice day outside, I try to go for a walk with my husband and my son. That's an anchor for me. I love spending time with God. For me, that's an anchor. Whenever I'm having a hard time, I spend time quietly with him, and it helps me feel safe. He's reliable to me. He's familiar to me. Another anchor might be calling my best friend, Sarah, and maybe we'll just have a chat. Maybe it's even just voice messaging. Those are my anchors. I hope that you have anchors. If you don't, I encourage you to try and find some. Build a routine. Find something that gives you safety, reliability, and familiarity, and hold on to those anchors when you're riding the storm of change. Another thing that navigators do, there's a ladybug in front of me. Maybe it'll show up on the screen. Navigators also have a plan. They look at the charts and the maps and they figure out, okay, where can I best navigate this storm? There's a lot of change we can't control, but even within that, is there something I can control? So if you have a lot of change happening in life, is there any change you can put hold on? Is there any change you can, press pause? Maybe not, but just something to think about. Maybe don't, get married and have a baby and buy a new house and get a new job all in the same year, if you can control it. If you can't, that's okay. But sometimes there's changes we can control. If you are leaving your job, that might not be the same time to change your friendship group. Or if you're leaving your church, maybe that's not the same time to do 10 other changes in your life. Like if you're changing your anchors, if you're changing other things in your life, try to limit the change or at least spread it out. Make a plan. If you had 10 New Year's resolutions of things you wanted to change this year, maybe let's rein it in a little bit and just do one at a time. When we limit the amount of change happening wherever possible, it helps us be more resilient through the change. Defer big life changes if you can, space them out. Find change that you can control, help compensate for the change that you can't. Another way to cope with change well is to take brain breaks. I told you at the beginning, even good change is taxing on our brain. Our brain needs breaks. It literally just needs chill out time. If you are the person who, like, when you go to bed at night and you put your head on the pillow and your brain starts racing, that tells me you're too busy. Because what happens is our brain is filled with lots of marbles, let's just say, lots of marbles rattling around. We're very busy in our day. We're taking in information constantly, and all those marbles are rattling around. We have thousands of thoughts every day. If you don't have quiet time, those marbles never get a chance to kind of go and fall into their places that they need to. They don't get a chance to fall into your long-term memory bank. They don't get a chance to fall back in, the land of no return. So if you don't take time during your day to do that, as soon as you stop and your head hits the pillow, wham, they're all ready to go and they're trying to find their spots and trying to find their slots. And that's overstimulating, and then it keeps us up. I've been there. Even just building in a little bit of a brain break can help with that. Even if it's like 5 minutes, it's better than nothing. So brain breaks looks like things like taking your breaks at work. Some people think it's more productive just to push through, but it's actually more productive to let your brain decompress so that the marbles can go where they need to. It makes you more productive for the rest of the day. If you don't have a day job and maybe you're retired, are you still filling your days with too many things? All of us need to have downtime for our brain so that we can relax, and that when we go to sleep, we can actually rest and enter the restorative stages of sleep. Find brain breaks. This might look like mindfulness is another way to find a brain break. Prayer can be a great way to find a brain break. Doing something fun. We don't have to be productive all the time. Doing silly, fun things. I played charades on the weekend. I'm going to sound like a real nerd. I hadn't played charades in probably 2 decades, and I'm dating myself, but it was so much fun, and it was really dumb, but it was amazing, and it was such a relaxing thing for my brain. Do self-care. Self-care is an overused word, but it is so underused in reality. Self-care is so good for our heart and mind. Read non-learning books. I don't know if you're like me. I have way too many learning related books. It's so good to just read, like, I don't know, like a story from, like, I don't know, ancient Egypt, or I don't know, just something, I don't know, Divergent. I don't know, just something that's like random and that has a good plot line. I've never read Divergent, but just it came to mind. Just something that's not work for your brain to give it a break. Because remember, learning new information, energy. So it's not relaxing to read an encyclopedia. It's not relaxing to read a really good mental health book. It's still work. Read something that's relaxing. Take your breaks at work, like I said, and take a day off work to relax. Don't fill your schedule in 24/7. I personally believe that human beings were created to take a day off a week. We don't do that anymore in today's society. The Sabbath rest day is sort of something of the past, but actually, like, research shows us that 1/7 of a time is very valid for our brains to relax. So if you can't take a day off a week, maybe you could try and find spots that you intersperse that rest throughout the week to cope. and to deal with change. Don't forget self-care and your basic needs. We forget about these really easily when we go through change. For example, when we go through change, our body craves a lot of carbohydrates that are fast because it wants quick glucose, it wants quick energy and fuel. So if you crave like chips and chocolate and pop and stuff like that when you're going through a lot of stress and change, it's because your body wants the fuel source because it's stressed. But when we take care of ourselves, meet our body's basic needs, when we rest, when we try to get some sleep, when we're taking our brain breaks so that we actually can sleep, drinking water, eating well, our body's going to use the fuel properly. Make sure you don't forget to drink. You know, people go through their whole workday and realize they haven't drank a single cup of water. Take a step back, take a deep breath, and don't forget your basic needs. It'll help build a foundation for you to cope with change. And yet these are the first things that often go out the window when we're overwhelmed. We all need support sometimes. I say even therapists need therapists because we can all benefit from talking to someone, and we heal in community. We're not meant to go through things in isolation. And quite frankly, we've had far too much isolation, I would say, over the last 2 years, which is not good for our mental health. So find community, talk to someone. There are online videos, there are online workshops, there are mental health apps, there are government counseling programs that are completely free all over Ontario. I don't know about the person from, I think it was Indiana, I don't know what's available there, but I know all over Canada, there are organizations that provide free mental health support. There's group counseling services, individual counseling services. Anyone going through change could benefit from talking to someone, I personally believe. Just to vent, even if that's all you do, is just say, blah, I'm going through this, please listen, validate me. Even that will be helpful for your brain and for your heart. And then maybe you might even learn some things and get some ways to cope. Just talking about it can make a big difference. And I just have a little bit of something here. The world is constantly changing around us. We've been bombarded with significant change, especially in the last few years. So please remember to take care of yourself, to create healthy routine, and don't forget to validate yourself and surround yourself with healthy people. If you want to know more about change, I'm almost like embarrassed to share this. I have a really old school video I filmed on my phone like 4 years ago when I was on mat leave. But it's actually similar to today's talk. It's a 7-minute talk on change and how to navigate it. So if you want to learn more, I'm on Mind Joy Counseling and Training on YouTube. And I do have a website. You know, Wayne mentioned I have a counseling organization. My caseload has been full for some time, but I have staff that I've hired, lovely therapists who love to support people. So if you are looking for a counselor, that's possibly a resource. But even more important in my mind, if you want resources, I've got lots of free ones. Instagram, if you want to give a follow, I try and post fairly regularly with little tips and tricks of how to cope. Or on Facebook, Mind Joy Counseling and Training. And then on YouTube, the videos are a little embarrassing. I'm not the best filmographer, but I've been told the content is helpful. So that's why I share it, and I will humble myself and expose myself and share that with you. And that is my presentation. There is time for questions, but thank you so much for being here. I hope it was helpful. You know, I'm sure, gosh, I can just imagine there's 20 people on this call. Each of you has a unique story. And I think there's even a group, so it might even be more. But each of you has a unique story. I can just imagine all the change each of you have been through as individuals. So please validate yourselves, take care of yourselves, and yeah, let's open it up for questions. Thank you very much.